Well, hello and welcome back to the RevOps Charlie YouTube channel for another special edition where we're going to be talking about buyer enablement and professional services and the role of professional services in bringing a sale in. And today I'm really pleased to welcome Jonathan Corrie, a good friend. She's the CEO of Precursive, which is a professional services automation platform built on the Salesforce platform. Jonathan, welcome to the channel.
Lovely to see you, mate. Lovely to see you. I love the energy. You just flip them from like just like the Charlie that I know to in the zone on the RevOps YouTube channel. Game time. Let's go.
Exactly.
I love the energy.
We're gonna leap out through the screen. Well, welcome. We're going to have a great chat. I gave a brief introduction to Precursive there, but maybe because it'll help set the scene. Do you want to just say a few words about Precursive and the types of customers that you work with?
Yeah, I mean, sure. You can go to the website precursive.com and check that out. But my background actually was in sales, so I hopefully can bring some of that experience into this conversation. So I was at a company called CEB previously, who were the folks who wrote the Challenger Selling research and book, which was all about what we're going to talk a little bit about today, which is buyer behavior and buyer enablement. And in that job, I was particularly interested in what happened post-sale. So the services delivery element of the solutions that we were selling at the time. I was selling commercial transformation products, which was basically the Challenger Selling program, which was a mixture of like consultancy and training to mostly enterprise technology businesses and telecom businesses in the UK and EMEA. And a friend of mine was running the delivery function, and we had this deal with Vodafone, it was at the time, who were a client of mine, and we were looking to schedule out a bunch of training sessions, and we needed people who spoke specific languages and who could do certain dates and things like this. And I said to my friend David, I was like, when can we start? And he's like, that's a great question. And just smiled. And I was like, is there an answer? And he's like, I'll get back to you. And I'm like, no, I really need to know. And he's like, come over here, sit down. When you asked me that question, you ruined my day. And I was like, oh, okay. And he's got like 3 or 4 screens. He like opens up this diary and this calendar and this spreadsheet and this, and he's like, and I just looked at him. I'm like, are you serious? And he's like, yep. I'm like, so we're gonna hit the phones, are we? And he's like, yep. And we just didn't have a lot of visibility. So I kind of saw this problem there about resourcing and what was happening kind of post sale. And then I did a kickoff talk at Vodafone sales kickoff. And there was like, it's quite funny. There was the global chief sales officer for Vodafone. He was one of the speakers. Obviously, it was the sales kickoff. There was then this partner from IBM, and then there was me, who was this AE from CEB, who I don't know what happened. I sort of talked my way into that, presenting this kind of buying behavior and Challenger, and I was the best presentation, I'm happy to say, and that was the feedback. And though after that, basically the guy who ran Germany, this guy Stefan, who's at Apple now, he got up and he said, what that kid was talking about, that's my problem. Sales and the factory hate each other. And the factory was the delivery engine of Vodafone's services at the time. And basically salespeople were comped on when the projects that they sold went live, and it was taking over a year. They weren't getting their comp. And so people were leaving as a result. So I kind of then saw this problem there, and it kind of crystallized some things. And so Precursive was born out of my experience and some of my co-founders who were at Deloitte and Accenture, who'd seen versions of the same problem, which was really about kind of that post-sale delivery of services and or product. And so Precursive is an application that's used typically by mid-market and enterprise companies, usually in the technology space, to manage and improve all elements of services delivery. So think about the project that's being delivered after the deal you've sold, the people who are going to deliver that work, all of that is kind of like, the project is kind of like the deal pre-sale. And so they're using us to manage all of the things in and around that and drive faster time to value. So in many ways, it's like a CRM for the delivery team. That's it.
Cool, fantastic, and we'll touch a little bit later on professional services and bringing that forward into the sales process. But maybe let's just start with going back to the experience of Challenger, which I maybe Challenger's like 2015 or something like that when that came out. It's probably a good 10 or 11 years ago.
Yeah.
And the short synopsis of that was that the successful sellers are the ones that are challenging, are taking some insight to their customers and helping them to think in a new way. Maybe a little bit of your perspective on both Challenger as a methodology, but also the other types of sales methodologies that you've come across and seen be effective.
Yeah, I mean, I think kind of my take on it is, we don't buy a lot of software in my business, but when we do, I have a role in that. And what I see there and what I see with the people that we engage with and what I hear from all of my friends and folks like you is just customers are a lot more educated than they ever have been. It's very easy to get access to information about potential vendors or about like how are other companies solving maybe the problem, not necessarily with the technology, but just solving certain problems. And then there's a reticence to, want to talk to salespeople. And I think that reticence is driven by a few things. It's driven by probably the general quality of the sales profession, which is very variable. And so, in years gone by, when you didn't have the internet, right, the source of information was the sales reps, right? It was people going out there, meeting customers, or it was the people supporting the sales reps, i.e. the pre-sales team or the professional services team. Whereas now, you don't need to do that. You can do a huge amount of research on your own. But there's also then, in parallel to that, there's a tendency for people to really want to define the problem that they need to solve, because that problem and that technology needs to work as part of, a workflow, as part of a customer journey, as part of a go-to-market. And it generally has to sync or integrate with so many other things. So there's just a huge amount of like information overload times complexity in terms of just the world of work times the pressure on companies to grow or be efficient or be effective, right? And that kind of all melds together and means that, you're dealing with an environment where you've got to be so precise and so accurate and so compelling and so technically educated in front of customers. And that's super hard to do. And I just think for me, that environment now, I think, SMB selling now is more akin to mid-market selling. Mid-market selling is more akin to enterprise selling for sure. There's various elements of it and there's various tiers of that. And then enterprise selling is probably kind of as it was. And actually, I would say potentially is a little bit easier than mid-market, to be honest with you. Because you're dealing with people with kind of professional buying groups and buying teams, which creates this level of complexity in procurement and restriction. But it's potentially much more organized. Whereas in mid-market and SMB, it's often less organized, fluid, with people potentially who haven't bought technology before, don't know the steps. So it's like. Conclusion, Mike, is like it's fucking hard, right? To be in sales these days, but it's also really hard to be just a successful person. I think in business these days it's getting harder and harder. And then so you've then got these kind of sales methodologies and things that like how do you like navigate that environment? And my feeling is that you have to use a combination of these things. I don't think there's one size fits all. I think the thing about things like Challenger is it's kind of misunderstood. It's like, yeah, you challenge customers or you bring them insight. And yeah, that's part of it. But I think what the research really showed before that was buyers appreciate the sales experience. They place a lot of emphasis on that. They place emphasis on being educated, making good decisions, avoiding mistakes, being coached through a process. Because a lot of the frustration now is the disorganization of the process and having to do that across 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 vendors. It's hugely time consuming, and therefore people get frustrated. lose interest. So I think what Challenger does is it helps people to think about like how like the mindset of getting into the buyer's shoes before you go and meet them. That's a big part of it, is you do your research and your due diligence before you go and meet them, because you should know the client's problems before you step in the room, in my opinion. And what you're doing is in those meetings, and this is where solution selling or value selling or consultative selling, whatever, I don't care what it's called, but that's really the discovery and the diagnosis and the techniques around that, right? And defining problems, which again, there's a multitude of ways that you can do that. I think the biggest challenge, though, is how you combine the methodologies to do it quickly, because otherwise you just end up in, extremely long deal cycles, which can be very costly if you don't have high win rates, right?
Yeah, well, I'm going to come into the some different sales methodologies and some of the sales sort of enablement stuff in a moment. You mentioned there about how buyers are way more educated today than they have been in the past, because they can get into Slack communities, they can access so much information from their peers. And I always sort of think of an information staircase that back in the day when I started, sort of 1999, people might come to a rudimentary website and they get some element of information, but then they need to, if it was the early days of SDRs, they could speak to that first person that would give them a bit of information about what kind of products you have and how it's priced. Then they move up a level to speak to an account executive who's got a bit more detail. But then they start getting to the people that really know the information, the solution consultant, the pre-sales, and then maybe on to an onboarding person. And as they travel up, they're getting more of that information.
Yeah.
Today, they got access to so much of that stuff without having to speak to anyone, that when they come in, they're often being mismatched, where they're coming in at this sort of entry level, but they're already 3 or 4 steps further up. And they want a very different level of information. So when you're thinking about maybe it's the types of customers that you work with, or even as a buyer yourself, what do we think about buyer enablement? What does that mean in your world?
Again, I think there's so much that you can do. It depends on it's so much that you can do. I think so. To sort of unpack some of the points. So one is there a mismatch or mismatch? Almost certainly yes. What I've seen, though, as a result of that, is you have less senior people who are going in, like are coming inbound, right? Most, I think, vendors will see that, like senior most people aren't filling out forms on websites for meetings or booking meetings because of that mismatch, because they're like, my experience generally is speaking to maybe an SDR, if that's the inbound sort of lead flow, right? In my business, it goes straight into the diaries of the account executives. And in my business, the account executives are also doing demos. They're full cycle salespeople. It was something that I believed in early on. I was like, well, we could have SEs doing all the demos, but that's going to get super costly for us. We want to, but I want the salespeople to know the tech. I want the salespeople to be domain experts, product experts, versus our peers, which is true. That leads to other challenges in terms of sales productivity, because they're owning some things that maybe would be owned by other people. But in our world, it means that when people do come inbound, they're getting a very high quality conversation to begin with. Now, the mismatch there that then happens for us is that people are like, oh, I want to see a demo. And we go, we don't do that. Even though the button says book a demo, which it really shouldn't be. We've had this constant thing about, do we call it book a meeting and all of these types of things, because good buyers and sort of the experience that they get from our team kind of starts with insight. There's a lot of preparation that goes into those meetings. So it's very rare that someone's coming into that meeting and they go, oh, hey, what do you want to do? It's like they know what you do, what your business model is. They're bringing insight into it and these types of things. And we'll often hear from our buyers, like they will like start laughing or saying, were you in our recent meeting, and things like this, because it's like, this is what we see. How does that manifest in your world? And it's like, yep, that's it. And what that does is it kind of nullifies this, I just want a demo moment. You'll get some buyers, though, and that mismatch for us is like, they're through a cycle, and they're through a research cycle, and they're looking at different vendors, and maybe they want to look at you as one of 4, or they've looked at other people and they're now having to check alternatives. And so it's a checkbox exercise. It's like, we really just want to see a demo to say that we've done it. So you have to kind of sniff that out. Then there's a kind of a version of that where there's the mismatch just in terms of like what they want, right? So you've got to have the customer acumen to know that that's not quite us. That's maybe just alongside what we do, but it's not us. So you have to filter that out. I think though that the big thing that we've really been focused on is what are the assets that you can have pre, during, and post in these meetings to make them high impact. So, for example, all of our reps have, demo videos that they've done. I've done one, right? There's one, you go on our website, there's the CEO doing the demo because the CEO knows the product, right? But they've done them and they've done them by personas. Now, what we focus on then is like, if people want to see that stuff, it's like, we just send out to them. It's like, this is the core product. So if you're not looking at that and going, that's good, then you're not our ICP. Right.
Yeah.
So that, and our product looks good. It's got good UX. It's got good UI. It's a very solid solution. So that generally lands well. But there's always this dance, which is, I've got to be credible enough and show you enough product for you to want to then, or allow me to go and talk to other people. Right. And that's why I think this discovery process and approach is, if you've got an SDR doing that, hey, Charlie, welcome. What do you do? What do you want? What's your problems? Okay, tell me more about that. Okay, do you have budget? This like thing, right? I'm not sure it's in that voice, but it's close, right? And they're like, yeah. I'm not getting any value from this. I've not got, and that it might only be 10, 15 minutes, and they get frustrated and they're like, fuck this. I'm going to look at someone else. Or that person may have asked the right questions and then, okay, I'll set you up with a meeting with Bob or Susan, who are always on my sales team when I'm talking about it. Then they come into it, and depending on that handover, they're asking exactly the same questions. And the client's like, why did I have that meeting? You're wasting my time. Exactly. So kind of my philosophy on discovery, and it is, I've always railed against some of the terms, maybe mistakenly, of like the language, like you're an account executive, you're this, you're that. Like there's this anagram bingo that the client's playing, which is not fun. And ultimately, I think for me, you should, like, the discovery is done prior to the meeting, right? We know their business model, we know what they do, we know their role. We should have a good feeling. Potentially there's a form, like there's a field, like what do you want to achieve, or there's some drop down menus. You can make that form a bit more expansive. You can send an email prior to the meeting that's tailored, asking some questions in the meeting. You may get some stuff back, you may get the requirements back, you may get a doc back, and then you're going into that meeting, and it's not discovery, it's diagnosis, right? It's like, these are the problems, what are the impacts of those problems and the ripple effects thereof. Now that is very difficult for an SDR to do. That's really a salesperson's job. So again, it's just this kind of dance around, like, what does the buyer want? What do we need to do? What does our team look like? Can they do that? Have we got enough people? Do we have so many inbound leads that we actually do need an SDR team or a BDR team to filter out because otherwise the AEs would just be overwhelmed with dross, right? There's all of these variables. So it's very, very difficult to be like, there's one size fits all.
Yeah. From a customer's perspective, I was on a corporate visions session a few months back, and they were talking about selling to executives, and what executives want is business acumen. It's like, what can you teach me that I don't already know about my business or about my industry? I don't care about your product yet. I've got other people that are going to deal with, does the product solve, and have the right features. But right now, I want you to teach me something about my business. And you get these sort of very tenured account executives that have been in the game long enough that they've got some of that. But that's the real gap for these SDRs and first-time AEs. And I'm always troubled that the onboarding program in so many companies, it spends a lot of time teaching these SDRs about the sales process and the stages and gates and what you should use in your CRM. Right. It spends a lot of time talking about the product and the features, and almost zero about the actual personas that you're going to be selling into. We
Okay.
sell into HR directors, like what is a day in the life of the HR director? What are the pains that they're facing? There's just very little of that. And so it's no surprise that these junior sellers just don't have that business
Interesting.
acumen.
I didn't know. I kind of hear that. I don't know that because I've never worked in another software company about than mine, and we don't do that. So, like, if you look at an onboarding plan, in fact, while we're chatting, I'll bring one up in the background for, and I'm just curious to see what ours is. So, yeah, week one is. So this is week one, the weekly roundup, and they have to check off what they've done. So it's, I have heard from customers about their world and their challenges. I understand the different industries that our customers operate in. I've reviewed key buyer personas. Customer section, week one.
Yeah. Fantastic.
And that's, week two, can articulate who some of our customers are and how they use Precursive. I've identified some of the key metrics that our customers use to manage their business. I understand the buyer personas more deeply through practice and shadowing. That continues the first 4 weeks. So yeah, I hear that, and that's the biggest problem. Because the thing is if you're so this year we onboarded an SDR, come out of university, no experience, smart kid, great kid. He's doing really well now. It took him a little while to ramp into work. Not just being at home and having your meals cooked for me or university. And so I ended up onboarding him because his manager was not very well. So I was like, I'll do it. And we just spent like all these sessions. Just I was like, these are who the clients are. This is their world. This is what they do. And then spent a lot of time just on role playing of like, just pretend I'm someone and just explain to me, not pitch me, but just explain to me who the people are that you work with. Imagine I'm your mum or your dad or, auntie, whoever, and just explain to me, okay, there's these types of people. They do this. They've got these sorts of problems. And then they use us to help them with this, and this, right? And it was really getting people to be able just to articulate it, not read it out, but just like phone calls. And then I'd have them send me voice notes on Slack. So you just got to send me that, explaining it. And you start with notes, and then you stop, and then you need to be able to get up and walk around the office and do it. And until it's like learning something back in university, right? You just got to learn this customer world. And then once you're then on the phone, then really what you need to be able to do is talk to somebody and be like, I know your world, and I demonstrate to you that I know your world. I demonstrate to you that I've done some research about you and your company. These are the problems that I see for your peers. How does that resonate? Yep, that's my world. Okay, well, these problems typically exist. Is that something you're facing? This is very, very simple. Yes. Okay, how? Well, now at how, they're either going to go, what do you do? Right? Because there's always like, hey, I get a thumbs up on the studio thing. Because there's always these, and this is the other thing, is once you kind of understand that, and then you begin to understand conversation structure, that there's only really kind of like 3 or 4 outcomes to a cold call, right? One is, yes, I want a meeting. 2 is, which is the least likely. The most likely is, no, thank you, because it's a terrible cold call. Or it's, that's interesting, send me some more information, right? And you're going to have to follow up. And you essentially want to be able to explain, look, these are the people that we work with. These are their problems. Is that your world? Okay, great. And then they're going to ask you, what do you do? And it can be as simple as we help them solve those problems. We're a software business. We help them solve those problems. Okay, send me some information, right? But again, people aren't coached on that. They're talking about discovery, qualified, all this bullshit, which has no relevance, as you say. Or they're having to learn, maybe, I guess, to demo a product or what the product, what the product does. And it's like, no, you just got to be able to explain they've got these problems. Here's how we help you solve them. These are some examples of it. And then potentially you've got to be able to answer some other questions. Because the problem with this approach is it works, and then you start getting asked questions, and then suddenly you're in this 10-minute conversation with someone, and you get to a point where, like, I'm afraid you've got to speak to Bob and Susan now because I'm tapped out. Right? But yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. I just think the way that the way that people think about onboarding and developing that customer acumen and business acumen is fundamentally broken in most companies. I would guess.
Yeah. When I started selling, spin selling was the methodology of the day, and I don't know whether it's your first is always your favorite.
Was that Message Labs? Was that the Message
It
Labs
was,
gig?
yeah, it was,
Yeah,
exactly.
Okay.
In fact, the precursor to that, Star, just before Message Labs was created. But we spent a lot of time training on spin selling, and I still have my spin selling book next to me.
Yeah,
but
Neil Rackham,
every job that I've gone into since then, over the following 20 plus years, has been I've created those spin questions for different industries or different personas, because I've found the process. For those that are not familiar with spin, it's situation questions, problem questions, implication questions, and then need payoff, which is where they just sort of crowbarred something into the end.
But it's the spin.
Need payoff. That'll sound like spin. And it's the implication and the need payoff questions, which are the ones that really, demonstrate successful sellers, because it's where the business implication comes from. And so much of BANT, or even a lot of the MEDPIC, is situation and problem questions. It's like, who is this? What is this? What's the process? It's kind of interrogation. But not a lot of it is focused on that. What's the business implication, both implied and explicit challenges from that.
They'll only tell you that once you've built up the credibility, and that's the issue, right? So again, coming back to like this buyer environment, like if you're getting asked, if you've got 5 vendors, let's say you got 4 vendors and they've all got reasonably good AEs on this deal, right? That's going to be a lot. That's going to be pretty intense for the customer if they're all doing some version of spin, consultative selling, and medic. Because you know what? Those are all the like a version thereof. Medic is used by pretty much every technology business, right? So they're all using the same approach. That's exhausting for a client. Exhausting. So that's why it gets then fragmented. And what you'll see people hopping in and out of deals because they're like, nah, I'm not doing another one of those meetings. I'm gonna let so and so do it, right? Yeah. So I think kind of what's interesting about spin is like situation. So I would say that's very helpful for the SDR, the BDR. That situation is the research that you're doing on the company. And I like in the Challenger training, they taught this 4 lenses of tailoring. So when you tailor something to a client, and it always stuck with me, which was this 4 lenses was like industry, company, function, person. So it was like how you could look at, and I've seen you in your book, not that I read it, but you showed me it and I saw the page. But you're really good at that. And you, with your account plans where you take like, I don't know, Reckitt Benckiser or Johnson & Johnson, and you do a version of this where it's like, what's going on in their industry? What's going on in the company? What's going on? And so for BDRs and SDRs, anyone watching this, those are the 4 things that you can always look at. Because sometimes what you will find when you're doing your prospecting is you go on LinkedIn, some people, it's like a gold mine of stuff that you can use. Other people, there's nothing there. You want to sell to the people where there's nothing there often, right? Because they're the harder ones to get to. It's the least fashionable logos that are actually sometimes the better logos to get into. So then you need to start looking at what's going on in their industry. How's that changing? How does that then trickle down and affect them, how they go to market, their world? Again, this is all super hard stuff to do, right? Like good salespeople struggle with this. But again, I think good coaching of people like early on, right, of being like, how does this company make money? They're a tech business. They sell into marketing people. Okay, great. Is marketing easier or harder than it used to be? Do we think? I don't know. Go do some research, right? Is you getting more return on your marketing dollars than you did now? Don't know, right? So there's kind of all of these things where you can take that kind of situation and start to sort of unpack it, and that applies to both inbound and outbound, right? And if you have got SDRs who are taking those calls, they want to be doing that situation stuff before they take that call, because that may soften the blow of them not talking to someone who's kind of like educated. But I think going back to your old world, I remember you telling me the story about, I don't know, you were in the south of France, this office, and there was the book at the front, right, that you had to go and to the book,
Mm.
and
Yeah.
and that was for the numbers or something like that. And there was the one
We
book.
had
What was it?
it was, in fact, the computers were at the back of the office. There were
Right.
4 desktop computers, and that's where you could research, but you weren't allowed to research during the working day. So
Okay.
and then you would research,
Wow.
and then you would take you'd basically fill out your CRM on a bit of paper in a folder, and then
Yeah.
you'd spend your day calling through your folder. And
Yeah.
it was a bit of a boiler room, but it was very much, it focused the mind on, you got a 4-hour calling block. You got to make sure that you've got 4
Research done.
hours worth of paper in that booklet.
Right. Right. Yeah. I mean, I think that's something in this whole kind of like buyer enablement, seller enablement world that I think's been lost, is is just kind of like curiosity, having less information and having to go look for it. Like,
Yeah,
again, in
yeah,
my day, it was, when I was, it was maybe you were looking at an annual report, right? That was the information that was available. Yeah, there was some stuff on
mm,
the internet like later on, but it was generally kind of that downloaded from a company's website. LinkedIn wasn't really a big thing in the earlier days. So you
mm,
really had to do your research and know your buyer and before you were going in. And I think these days, what's the problem with all of these sales tools is that they surface a bunch of information that is so tangential, right? So
mm.
I get hit up with like, hey, you've raised capital, would you like to buy some IT security software? Or like, it's so, because that's whatever it is, sales loft or outreach or whatever it
Yeah,
is, it's just like popping that into some kid's feed, and it's like, okay, this guy likes biscuits,
mm,
I'll go and tie that to like, hey Charlie, I see you like biscuits, do you want to buy some CRM software? No.
yeah, yeah,
um
yeah. No,
so
thanks.
there's definitely like something's been lost through that. The other thing that I
Mm,
noticed is we use HubSpot, right? And it's the kind of the outbound tool to create a call only like list, right? So just a bunch of people with numbers, and then like the field for like the research is surprisingly hard to do, right? Because they're all geared up for day 1, send notes. Day 3, send LinkedIn with smiley face. Day 7, call them, right?
mm,
And that's just not the way to do it. Because that's why you see these like, oh, no one's making any calls. Or
mm.
it's fatiguing because they're like bumping around these tools where there isn't just a list where you can blitz through.
Yeah,
Or it's in a
yeah,
sequence and it's like, oh, now I'm doing that, now do this, now do that. And it's just not. And so one of the big things for us was, for our guy, was like, once we nailed that, he was like, right, I can actually go in, like you say, like your South of France story, I've got my people to
mm,
call, and I get through it in 30 minutes, 45 minutes, then I do more research, then I do the
yeah,
next thing, then I do another blitz. So that was kind of like my view on how the world's changed. And I think you got
mm,
to go a bit more analog, in my opinion, I think, these
yeah,
days.
yeah. And you end up having a better conversation with the customer because you're actually in the moment, and it's one of the reasons why I love being in sales the whole way through, is getting to learn about the way that businesses work and being
Hmm.
genuinely curious. And you ask them questions about, how does that work? How does that work? And that comes across as not someone that's just trying to pitch a bit of product, but
Right.
actually, I want to understand your world so that I can help you. And if I can help you, great. And if not, then I'll point you in a different direction.
Yeah, I also think that the way kind of the world's gone, right? Everyone's got a phone. Like I went to my sister's it was my sister's birthday on the weekend, and I went into town. I live in London, so I got the train into town to meet her for her and my family for lunch. And I was walking through London Bridge Station, and I listen to music all the time, and I'm not really doing that. And I just was looking around at how many people were doing that, and it's just
Mm,
amazing. It's like, it's just amazing that so many people sit there or walk reading, or scrolling or whatever they're doing. I'm not critical of that, but what
mm,
I do think it means is that, like, I'm not looking at you now and I'm thinking, I look off, and when you're talking I look at you, because I find video calls very distracting, because I always end up
mm,
looking at myself, because myself just, and it stops my brain working quite as it should. So I really have to focus on like looking at you and these types of things. And I think that's hard for learning. And
mm,
so a lot of the example that I was giving was, I try and do a lot of calls with people. So like you have a meeting and it's a phone call and you got to get people to walk around, right? That can be for training. It used to be that we would do like the sales meetings practice. Don't do them over a video call. It's a call just to get them used to actually having like a conversation. And now we're really focused on being there in person, and you can see how like some of these young guys that we went through COVID come out the back of that, and now we're getting in front of people and like, oh, they're good, these in-person meetings, aren't they? And I'm like, yeah,
it's fun. Exactly.
Yeah, they are. You get a lot more done. We just compressed 3 weeks worth of a sales cycle into an afternoon. But I think the other thing that you raised, and which is you've kind of got this, it's much more of like a team sport now, right, than I think it was, at least for me, back in the day. And I do think that, you have to have, if you're selling anything remotely complex, you'll kind of have that partnership with pre-sales or PS. And I think there's as much work to be done there on helping them to understand the sales process, the methodology, and really working on the choreography of the sessions that you have when they're involved. I think that's something that I'm really focused on at the moment as we kind of evolve our model, which is down to, I came up with this thing the other day where we were saying we're gonna name all of the different types of sessions where we bring in professional services, right? So we had calls, like there will be certain types of demo support, technical scoping, integration conversations. So we were sort of naming all of these different types of pre-sales like interactions, and then a description of what they are, and then who owns it, who's the lead, and who's the follower, as it were. And it was interesting because we could see there was about, I don't know, maybe 12 of these different types of things that we do. And we're like, right, these all need to be basically cookie cutter. They all need to be consistent. So one of them, for example, is clients, like they want to understand the implementation, right? So we sell into professional services teams. They're implementing software with their customers. They're going to use our software to help them manage implementing software. They want to know what the implementation looks like because, one, that's timeline. Two, it's credibility. Do we know what we're doing? Is our methodology robust? All of this type of thing. So, we've been really looking at, right, well, how do you present that in such a way that it's scalable and easy, hits the right notes, differentiates you, and can be delivered by your colleague in a very scalable and consistent way? But also in such a way that if so-and-so isn't available, we could tag someone else in and they could do the same thing. So that's an example. And then the other thing that, we've really been looking at is like going back to that diagnosis thing, is we'll have kind of very detailed like discovery and diagnosis that bleeds into then solution architecture scoping. And again, we were like, right, this all needs to be super consistent in terms of how it's done and what the outputs are, so that we can tag people in and out, or so that in a clutch, like another person could step in and do parts of it, and we could try and figure stuff out around it. And again, I just think it's incredibly important to be able to like partner with those colleagues, kind of understand that post-sale journey, services, customer success, people are really interested in that. And therefore, you need to partner with those teams. You need to bring them in early, and you need to work at the choreography that you have between you, not, hey, come and join this call and say something smart.
Yeah, I was reading Gartner's software buying trends report that came out for 2024 a couple of weeks back, and I'll put the link in the show notes. But they have a section there which is around the top part of the sales experience that influences a buyer. And number one was integration capabilities. What is it? The ability to support the integration process was 44%. So that was the top. Not the suit and tie of the salesperson, not the quality of the presentation documents, not even pricing. It's the ability to deal with the onboarding and then the the ongoing integration. And I wonder if in your clients you're seeing that, where they're bringing more of a focus on pre-sales and professional services up to the front of the sales process?
I mean, certainly in our business, we try and move that as far forward as possible because that's kind of the area that we're in and the area that we sell in. It depends. So depending on the solution, part of what I do is I host I created this network for services leaders, and there's about 200 or so companies. So that Slack group thing that you mentioned where people are learning on their own, we have one of those. And there's about 120 people, for example, in that Slack channel. And now, interestingly enough, one of the recent questions was from a company, US-based company who sell a workflow management solution. And the question there was, I'm going into this sales kickoff. I've talked my way into it, and I want to help improve the handover process. And I have some thoughts on this, and there's some things that sales can do better. And in their world, there isn't really a lot of PS or implementation. It's kind of very cookie cutter. So a salesperson sells a deal, adds a package, and that's it, right? And then it's handed over, and implementation or PS picks it up. So if you're in that world, right, then, if the expectations is that the implementation is easy, then it should be, and there should be kind of good documentation, clear plans, timelines, etc., and then smooth handovers and a clear kind of repeatable methodology so that what should be a 30, 60 day onboarding, or maybe it's a week, maybe it's 30 days, maybe it's 60 days, is as smooth and consistent as possible. So the emphasis there for most of the companies that I deal with is kind of like velocity and quality, right? So can we combine the two? Fast launch times. You then have this question around, well, is launch value or not? Are they actually getting value? Because with some of these transactional solutions, you can get it switched on very quickly, but are you actually getting value? Then as you go more up market, kind of what you see is the need to bring in services or the post-sale people responsible much earlier in sales cycles. Because as you say, there's much more focus on, how does it integrate with our existing technology stack? Is it compliant? There's a lot of compliance and security considerations these days. I mean, if you read the newspapers today, there's all this stuff about TikTok getting hacked, and we were working with a company that got hacked, not on our software, but we were in the sales cycle. That delayed the sales cycle by probably 4 months because of it's like, holy shit, got a load of mess to clean up. So there's the security and the compliance, the implementation, like they really, really want to know what's going to happen, because it's not just how much does it cost, it's how much time is it. How much time is it going to take me to, is it 50% of my FTE of these 3 people? In our world, again, you've got maybe anywhere from 3 to maybe 10, 15, 20 people on a project, or who are, involved. And certainly in most projects, you're bringing in like a bunch of people to do testing and product enablement within it. So again, I think it's just this clarity. They want kind of clarity and to reduce risk about, can we actually consume and digest this investment? And I think the biggest challenge for most organizations that are selling bigger technologies that might be sitting within a function is not just that they don't want to buy your solution, it's they can't do another technology implementation this year. They've just put in X Salesforce or Gainsight or SAP's upgrade or whatever it is. They don't want to do your project again because everyone's exhausted and lost the will to live.
Yeah.
So there's that element as well to it. So I think there's just this wide spectrum of, PS being brought in much later, post closed won versus much earlier, and that kind of aligns to the complexity and maturity curve of the problems that you're solving.
Yeah. And I think bringing us towards the end of our conversation, we started at the beginning about Challenger, written by Matt Dixon. And on my weekend run, I was listening to Matt being interviewed on another podcast about the Jolt effect, which came out more recently. And the synopsis of that is that the biggest competition is no decision, to stay with the status quo for exactly some of those things that you mentioned. Like, we just haven't got the appetite for dealing with this. One of the things that he talked through in what makes successful salespeople is and you touched on this earlier, is having that confidence and capability to run your own demos, to understand the technology and the integrations, and being able to comfortably have that conversation with your customer, not go, oh, I'm immediately going to just pat this over to my pre-sales person, and then while she or he is talking to you, I'm just going to check on my emails, because immediately the customer is now looking at you as someone that adds no value. Actually, it's that person that I should be speaking to. And if you can't help me on the technical side of things, then should I be trusting you with which module I should have and why I need a 3-year license, not a 1-year license? So I think that brings back to that partnership between pre-sales, onboarding, CSMs, and the seller is going to be increasingly important, and having that both business and technical acumen is going to be the source of success for salespeople.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. I couldn't agree more. I think that comes back to what I was saying at the start, right? Is like the level of knowledge that you have to have around your customer and your product is pretty significant. It starts with understanding the customer really well. Once you do that, then when you learn the product, and you may not learn it all, but if you learn the fundamentals of it, you're much more able to speak to the power of that if you really understand the customer as well.
Yeah.
Because you don't need to be doing demos where you're like doing 10,000 clicks. Often it's good storytelling to begin with, and then you go into very deep scenario demoing kind of later on. But no, I think Matt's a great guy. I used to work with him, so I was in that team when Challenger came out. So I used to work with Matt, great guy. And I think it's always been there. I think it's if you had 10 deals, you'd close X, 3 would push, right? So if you had 10 deals, you close 2, 3 push, and the rest you lose, right? So the 3 that pushed is the no decision. I think what's interesting, and I only switched on to this, is like actually you got 2 sales cycles within a year, actually, as an AE sometimes. So you could be talking to someone in Q1 and they go, not now. We missed budget, or we can't do it. That deal is not dead. That deal comes back around and could start in as little as 3, 4, 5 months in advance, because you've got to do it in advance of your budget cycle. So for example, I think this is a really good tip. It's like, if you're selling, you've got a deal that misses in a certain quarter or pushes or gets delayed, or they're like, it's on hold, right? Like that, getting back in ahead of the next budget cycle, making sure that it's budgeted, making sure the business case is there. You're then able to transition into, oh shit, we closed that in Q4, right? And I think that's been one of my good learnings, I think, as I've got older, as it were. But super interesting to chat, mate. Hopefully that was reasonably helpful for your
really, really helpful talking
audience.
Through buyer enablement, bit of seller enablement, and then a link into professional services. How can people be helpful to you and to Precursive?
I think the world just needs a bit of help, doesn't it, right now? Let's all try and be a bit nicer to our fellow humans. If you see rubbish on the street, pick it up. I had a proper Barney with a bunch of Dutch teenage tourists in London once. So I was on a one-on-one with one of my team doing one of these walking meetings, and I was in and around St. Paul's, and I'd sort of cut in off the road to have like a quiet moment. And there was this bunch of school kids on a trip to London, and they were just kicking this kind of bottle around on the floor, and I forgot that I was I started accosting them, saying, there's a bin over there. Why don't you, instead of kicking rubbish around, why don't you pick it up and put it in the bin? And they just thought I was mental. And I just took it a step further, and I just went up to them and I said, come on, listen, because I've got this thing about it. So I was just like, right, put it in the bin. Yeah. And then eventually, like, the teacher's like, why is this guy chatting to these school kids, my kids? And so he came over, and I was like, just teach him a little bit of, like, if you're in, like, let's
keep
just all try and save the world a little bit. So no, I think just let's all try and care about our surroundings a little bit, and because there's enough terrible things going on this planet right now, and I just think if all of each of us takes our work a little bit less seriously and takes our fellow people and the world a bit more seriously, we'd all be a bit better for it. That's how they
100%.
can help.
Well, what a great way to end. Jonathan, thanks so much. Always a pleasure to chat. And I'll add your contact details, your LinkedIn into the show notes as well. Look forward to speaking to you soon.
Thanks, mate. Take care, Charlie.
Cheers. Bye.